Section 3 of Nonsense Novels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Nonsense Novels by Stephen Leacock. Section 3. Guido the Gimlet of Ghent. A Romance of Chivalry. It was in the flood tide of chivalry. Knighthood was in the pod. The sun was slowly setting in the east, rising and falling occasionally as it subsided, and illuminating with its dying beams the towers of the grim castle of Guggensberg. Isolde the Slender stood upon an embattled turret of the castle. Her arms were outstretched to the empty air, and her face, upturned as if in colloquy with heaven, was distraught with yearning. Anon she murmured, "Guido," and bewhiles a deep sigh rent her breast. Sylph-like and ethereal in her beauty, she scarcely seemed to breathe. In fact, she hardly did. Willowy and slender in form, she was as graceful as a meridian of longitude. Her body seemed almost too frail for motion, while her features were of a mold so delicate as to preclude all thought of intellectual operation. She was begirt with a flowing kirtle of deep blue, bebound with a belt bebuckled with a silvern clasp, while about her waist a stomacher of point lace ended in the ruffled farthingale at her throat. On her head she bore a sugar-loaf hat shaped like an extinguisher and pointing backward at an angle of 45 degrees. "Guido," she murmured, "Guido." And erstwhile she would wring her hands as one distraught and mutter, "He cometh not." The sun sank and night fell, enwrapping in shadow the frowning castle of Guggensberg, and the ancient city of Ghent at its foot. And as the darkness gathered, the windows of the castle shone out with fiery red, for it was Yuletide, and it was wassail all in the great hall of the castle, and this night the Margrave of Guggensberg made him a feast, and celebrated the betrothal of Isolde, his daughter, with Tancred the Tenspot. And to the feast he had bidden all his liege lords and vassals, Hubert the Husky, Edward the Earwig, Rollo the Rumbottle, and many others. In the meantime the Lady Isolde stood upon the battlements and mourned for the absent Guido. The love of Guido and Isolde was of that pure and almost divine type found only in the Middle Ages. They had never seen one another. Guido had never seen Isolde, Isolde had never seen Guido. They had never heard one another speak. They had never been together. They did not know one another. Yet they loved. Their love had sprung into being suddenly and romantically, with all the mystic charm which is love's greatest happiness. Years before, Guido had seen the name of Isolde the Slender painted on a fence. He had turned pale, fallen into a swoon, and started at once for Jerusalem. On the very same day, Isolde in passing through the streets of Ghent, had seen the coat of arms of Guido hanging on a clothesline. She had fallen back into the arms of her tirewomen more dead than alive. Since that day they had loved. Isolde would wander forth from the castle at earliest morn, with the name of Guido on her lips. She told his name to the trees. She whispered it to the flowers. She breathed it to the birds. Quite a lot of them knew it. At times she would ride her palfrey along the sands of the sea and call "Guido" to the waves. At other times she would tell it to the grass, or even to a stick of cordwood or a ton of coal. Guido and Isolde, though they had never met, cherished each the features of the other. Beneath his coat of mail Guido carried a miniature of Isolde, carven in ivory. He had found it at the bottom of the castle crag, between the castle and the old town of Ghent at its foot. How did he know that it was Isolde? There was no need for him to ask. His heart had spoken. The eye of love cannot be deceived. And Isolde? She, too, cherished beneath her stomacher a miniature of Guido the Gimlet. She had it of a traveling chapman, in whose pack she had discovered it, and had paid its price in pearls. How had she known that he it was, that is, that it was he? Because of the coat of arms emblazoned beneath the miniature, the same heraldic design that had first shaken her to the heart. Sleeping or waking, it was ever before her eyes. A lion, proper, quartered in a field of gules, and a dog improper 3/4 in a field of buckwheat. And if the love of Isolde burned thus purely for Guido, the love of Guido burned for Isolde with a flame no less pure. No sooner had love entered Guido's heart than he had determined to do some great feat of emprise or adventure, some high achievement of daring-do, which would make him worthy to woo her. He placed himself under a vow that he would eat nothing, save only food, and drink nothing, save only liquor, till such season as he should have performed his feat. For this cause he had at once set out for Jerusalem, to kill a Saracen for her. He killed one, quite a large one. Still under his vow, he set out again at once to the very confines of Pannonia, determined to kill a Turk for her. From Pannonia he passed into the highlands of Britain, where he killed her a Caledonian. Every year and every month Guido performed for Isolde some new achievement of emprise. And in the meantime Isolde waited. It was not that suitors were lacking. Isolde the Slender had suitors in plenty ready to do her slightest hest. Feats of arms were done daily for her sake. To win her love suitors were willing to vow themselves to perdition. For Isolde's sake, Otto the Otter had cast himself into the sea. Conrad the Cocoanut had hurled himself from the highest battlement of the castle head first into the mud. Hugo the Hopeless had hanged himself by the waistband to a hickory tree, and had refused all efforts to dislodge him. For her sake, Siegfried the Susceptible had swallowed sulphuric acid. But Isolde the Slender was heedless of the court thus paid to her. In vain her stepmother, Agatha the Angular, urged her to marry. In vain her father, the Margrave of Gugensberg, commanded her to choose the one or the other of the suitors. Her heart remained unswervingly true to the Gimlet. From time to time love tokens passed between the lovers. From Jerusalem, Guido had sent her a stick with a notch in it to signify his undying constancy. From Pannonia he sent a piece of board, and from Venetia about 2 feet of scantling. All these Isolde treasured. At night they lay beneath her pillow. Then, after years of wandering, Guido had determined to crown his love with a final achievement for Isolde's sake. It was his design to return to Ghent, to scale by night the castle cliff, and to prove his love for Isolde by killing her father for her, casting her stepmother from the battlements, burning the castle, and carrying her away. This design he was now hastening to put into execution. Attended by 50 trusty followers under the lead of Carlo the Corkscrew and Beowulf the Bradawl, he had made his way to Ghent. Under cover of night they had reached the foot of the castle cliff, and now, on their hands and knees in single file, they were crawling round and round the spiral path that led up to the gate of the fortress. At 6 of the clock they had spiraled once. At 7 of the clock they had reappeared at the second round, and as the feast in the hall reached its height, they reappeared on the 4th lap. Guido the Gimlet was in the lead. His coat of mail was hidden beneath a parti-colored cloak, and he bore in his hand a horn. By arrangement he was to penetrate into the castle by the postern gate, in disguise, steal from the Margrave by artifice the key of the great door, and then by a blast of his horn summon his followers to the assault. Alas! there was need for haste, for at this very Yuletide, on this very night, the Margrave, wearied of Isolde's resistance, had determined to bestow her hand upon Tancred the Tenspot. It was wassail all in the great hall. The huge Margrave, seated at the head of the board, drained flagon after flagon of wine, and pledged deep the health of Tancred the Tenspot, who sat plumed and armoured beside him. Great was the merriment of the Margrave, for beside him, crouched upon the floor, was a new jester, whom the seneschal had just admitted by the postern gate, and the novelty of whose jests made the huge sides of the Margrave shake and shake again. "Odds bodikins!" he roared, "but the tale is as rare as it is new. And so the waggoner said to the pilgrim that sith he had asked him to put him off the waggon at that town, put him off he must, albeit it was but the small of the night. By Saint Pancras! Whence hath the fellow so novel a tale? Nay, tell it me but once more, haply I may remember it. And the baron fell back in a perfect paroxysm of merriment. As he fell back, Guido, for the disguised jester was none other than he, that is, than him, sprang forward and seized from the girdle of the Margrave the key of the great door that dangled at his waist. Then, casting aside the jester's cloak and cap, he rose to his full height, standing in his coat of mail. In one hand he brandished the double-headed mace of the Crusader, and in the other a horn. The guests sprang to their feet, their hands upon their daggers. "Guido the Gimlet!" they cried. "Hold," said Guido, "I have you in my power." Then placing the horn to his lips, and drawing a deep breath, he blew with his utmost force. And then again he blew like anything. Not a sound came. The horn wouldn't blow. "Seize him!" cried the baron. "Stop," said Guido. "I claim the laws of chivalry. I am here to seek the Lady Isolde, betrothed by you to Tancred. Let me fight Tancred in single combat, man to man." A shout of approbation gave consent. The combat that followed was terrific. First Guido, raising his mace high in the air with both hands, brought it down with terrible force on Tancred's mailed head. Then Guido stood still, and Tancred, raising his mace in the air, brought it down upon Guido's head. Then Tancred stood still and turned his back, and Guido, swinging his mace sideways, gave him a terrific blow from behind, midway, right center. Tancred returned the blow. Then Tancred knelt down on his hands and knees, and Guido brought the mace down on his back. It was a sheer contest of skill and agility. For a time the issue was doubtful. Then Tancred's armor began to bend, his blows weakened, he fell prone. Guido pressed his advantage, and hammered him out as flat as a sardine can. Then placing his foot on Tancred's chest, he lowered his visor, and looked around about him. At this second there was a resounding shriek. Isolde the Slender, alarmed by the sound of the blows, precipitated herself into the room. For a moment the lovers looked into each other's faces. Then with their countenances distraught with agony, they fell swooning in different directions. There had been a mistake. Guido was not Guido, and Isolde was not Isolde. They were wrong about the miniatures. Each of them was a picture of somebody else. Torrents of remorse flooded over the lovers' hearts. Isolde thought of the unhappy Tancred, hammered out as flat as a picture card and hopelessly spoiled; of Conrad the Cocoanut, head first in the mud, and Siegfried the Susceptible, coiled up with agonies of sulphuric acid. Guido thought of the dead Saracens and the slaughtered Turks. And all for nothing. The guerdon of their love had proved vain. Each of them was not what the other had thought. So it is ever with the loves of this world, and herein is the medieval allegory of this tale. The hearts of the two lovers broke together. They expired. Meantime Carlo the Corkscrew and Beowulf the Brad Owl, and their 40 followers, were hustling down the spirals as fast as they could crawl, hind end uppermost. End of Section 3. Recording by Trisha G.